French Alps. All are presumed dead. Rugged mountain terrain and bad weather are making it very difficult to reach the crash site, but one black box already has been recovered. We're back with Deborah Hersman, the former NTSB chair. She's now president and CEO of the National Safety Council. Deborah, in November, a Lufthansa Airbus A321 dropped, 4,000 feet in 1 minute after the autopilot lowered the jet's nose. How closely should investigators be looking right now? Autopilot system on all these Airbus planes?
You know, I think they'll be looking at all past events to try to identify any similarities. But I think the circumstances of this event, at least with respect to the loss of altitude, is very different. And so they'll really want to understand what caused this aircraft to descend at the rate and the way that it did, whether it was manual by the pilots or whether it was done by the autopilot.
The flight, as you know, was originally flying at a cruising altitude about an hour after takeoff from Barcelona at 38,000 feet. That's thought to be the safest point of a flight, right? So what are the options investigators are considering now as to what went wrong?
You know, cruise flight is actually one of the safest parts of flight because you don't see as many events. But when you have a loss of control or you have an event that's catastrophic at cruise, you actually have the potential to lose the entire plane like you're seeing here in this situation. And so it's really important for them to understand what was going on. I know that there are going to be so many things on the table. They could be looking at pressurization of the aircraft. They could be looking at equipment. Apparently, this aircraft had been inspected. There was some maintenance done just the day before. They'll want to look very closely at those maintenance records. If anything was changed out or if anything was checked, they're going to want to know what that was. Again, the black boxes are going to be able to give them really a roadmap. Investigators like to get them early so then they know which clues to go after.
What does it tell you, Deborah, that there was a distress call from the air traffic control tower on the ground, obviously, not necessarily from the plane itself, from the cockpit?
Well, pilots are always taught to aviate, navigate, and communicate, and so it's really about flying the airplane first if there's something going on. But given the amount of time that lapsed between when they left their cruise altitude to the ultimate crash, there was a lot of time at least to send out a beacon, a distress call, something. And so not seeing that coming from the crew is really going to be an important point for them to understand. Why didn't this crew communicate that there was something happening on the airplane when they had that much time? So that leads us to ask, did they have that much time? And understanding what happened. The fact that air traffic control put the call out, that's really important because it's demonstrating that they are tracking the airplane, they're trying to communicate with it, and they are actually being proactive about saying there's a problem here. Everyone's going to be looked at in the investigation, and the amount of time that lapsed between when decisions were made or communications happened will be critical.
Because once it went down from 38,000 feet and began a controlled descent over the next, 6, 7, 8 minutes, whatever it was, until it crashed into the French Alps over there, no communication whatsoever. They'll be listening very closely, assuming they find the the cockpit voice recorder, to see what, if anything, was said, if the pilots were even talking to each other, right? Or if they were out cold and it was just in a sort of a controlled descent.
That's right. There's a lot of things that could have gone on, and so understanding what situation the pilots were facing is important, but also the settings that the aircraft was in. Again, whether the controls were manually manipulated or whether they were automatically set and the aircraft was just following a plugged-in trajectory or rate of descent, that will be important to investigators.
Do they automatically look at the pilots in a situation like this to determine if there could have been anything that could have caused a pilot or a co-pilot or whatever to want to do this? There have been cases of pilots wanting to commit suicide, right?
Sure, and I think that always comes up in investigations early on, is to understand the human, the machine, and the environment. And so clearly when they're looking at the humans, they're looking at their experience, their history, not just whether or not they've had the proper training and the amount of hours in the cockpit, but also their their work-rest history. Are they fatigued? Are there things going on in their lives, whether it's personal or work, that need to be paid attention to? They'll be, looking at toxicology tests. And so investigations by their very nature look at everything. They'll be looking at the aircraft to determine what maintenance or condition it might have been in, and then they'll be looking at the environment. Was there anything going on? What were the weather conditions? What could have affected this flight differently than all of the other flights that were in that area?
If you were investigating, what's the first thing you'd be looking for?
Well, certainly those boxes. Like I said, if you get those boxes, they will give you the roadmap to what's next, where you want to go, what steps you want to take, who you want to talk to. They will really point you in the right direction. But I think with respect to these early hours of any crash, it's all about the victims and their families and making sure that they get taken care of and get the information in a timely manner. You've got to pay attention to that when you're on the ground.
Deborah Hersman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, rain, snow, and frozen terrain slowing the search and recovery operations in the French Alps. So we're going to get a forecast for what's going on in this mountain crash site. And why was there no distress call from the airliner before it went down? Our aviation